So you'll hear kind of a repeating theme here. It's a lot of project management is about communications. And when you have large projects or small projects, it's really important that you communicate. It's also important to communicate what the message is and be consistent in that message, right? So you want to have a really good executive management team work with you as depending on what your role is in the project, so you do communicate a consistent message. Not that I'm on one of the panel members, but I want to tell you a quick story. We actually worked on a project with 4 different institutions under one umbrella. And they said it was impossible to do the project, and that's why we took it. You always want a challenge, right? So one of the things we did is what you guys have done as well, is we actually met with the executive board that was running all the institutions, and we actually asked them to work on the messaging that we can communicate to everyone. And so we came up with one slide, and that one slide was in every single slide deck that we presented at every single meeting. And when there was a question about scope, direction, consistency across the project, we went back to that one slide and we said, is this within our design parameters? Is this within the goals and objectives of the project? Every time the executive team presented to hundreds and hundreds of people, we had to reach out to over 20,000 people. They conveyed the exact same message. And so that's another thing that also kind of helps maintain that commitment when the people see the executive team is committed to that as well as the project team. So that was a really good exercise for us, because we sat in a room, we're going, okay, this is a lot of people we have to communicate this to. And you guys have had, I don't know how many millions of people you have to reach out to. So the next topic is on governance. And you have a little PowerPoint slide there that you might want to look at. This one's actually kind of targeted at Barbara, but working on one of the largest statewide projects in California's history, so many people are involved, over 200 agencies, state staff, vendors. I had a question because I got a chance to interview the 3 of these people, and I said, wow, how do you manage the decision-making process and governance in something so large? And when do you set that foundation and framework? So maybe Barbara can explain some of that to us.
So one of the things that I actually think is one of the best things from an organizational standpoint that Fiscal has done is our ODMF, our Operational Decision-Making Framework, which is what you have a copy of there. With our governance structure being what it is, all of our decisions are consensus. We have no, what I call the big talking head. We don't have a single entity or person that says, you shall do. We have to come to agreement between our 4 partners. And that can be a challenge sometimes. You've got 2 constitutional officers, and you've got 2 governor appointees who are all trying to come to an agreement, and they've never done a relationship like that. So we had to come up with a methodology in which we could make decisions. We had to come up with a method that allowed decisions to be made at the lowest levels possible. We had to make sure that we weren't rehashing the same decisions years later, and we knew that we were documenting them. So we developed our Operational Decision-Making Framework, which is a plan that really talks about who can make what kinds of decisions, what level can they be made at, how do they get escalated. We have a SharePoint site where we document them all. It includes the statement of the problem, the analysis, the alternatives. We have our system integrator include their recommendation of the alternative that they would recommend. Our team puts in their recommendation. It has any escalation path, whether it's a level 1, which is the team. Level 2 is like the module functional level. A level 3 is a deputy director. Level 4 means it comes up to, like my level, the executives and our partner business executives from the 4 partners, and then a level 5 means it goes to our steering committee. And so we monitor whether, where it is in that cycle. They have due dates, so we can always monitor past due reports, what's coming. But it gives us a place to really have a comprehensive list of all the decisions we've made, all the decisions that we know are coming, all the decisions that we, if we make a decision and we're like, oops, we broke that decision, so now we've got to go back and relook at that. Or, We just had one actually just last night where something came up in a testing process where somebody said, hey, we found a defect. Well, no, actually, that's not a defect. Remember, we made an ODMF. That was actually design decisions. That is not a defect. So keep going. So it has really turned out to be a really solid way of managing a governance process that was incredibly complicated, keeping everybody on track, reminding people for a really long project where, nope, we made that decision 3 years ago, we're not going back, see, here it is. And making sure that decisions are being made at the lowest level possible. The key, I think, to a framework like this, though, is not only having it, but it's making it part of your culture. It's driving it from the top all the way down through every level of your management structure, every employee all the way down, that it is your culture. There are no hallway decisions made. Hallway decisions don't happen. They are an ODMF. Things, if you're a supervisor, if you're a team lead, if you hear a decision was made in a hallway, stop. That is an ODMF that gets logged and written. Did that get made at the right level? Okay, yeah, the team could make it, fine. But it's still an ODMF and it still gets logged. Did it not get made at the right level? Then it gets escalated immediately. So it's really building it into your culture and making sure that everybody clearly understands who and where they can make it. And it's our way of trying to also control that scope creep. That, and now that we're in testing, we've also found it's really important too, because it also helps us control that. Is it a defect that goes into a defect log? Or is this a request that a department's making that really truly is a design change that maybe we need to have an ODMF and talk about whether we want to do that or not? And so we found it's incredibly important at this point too in our testing to stop and look at, what's on our log. Defect, yes. Design, no. If it's a design, then let's get it into our ODMF process. So, when we talked about it on our phone calls and our conversations, I really think it is such a valuable tool that I wanted to share a copy with others because I think you can use it as a framework for yourselves. Again, but it's taken a very complicated governance. I think Vicky will attest to a very complicated governance process and really tried to kind of drive some real structure to it that everybody can understand.
And I can attest to that, and which is one of the reasons why at CA-MMIS, you learn your lessons as you go. And we, as I stated, we're just kicking off our system replacement piece of it, and so we call it the sphere of authority. And so we took that to our governance, to our steering committee, and got approval on that sphere of authority this last week. And it describes exactly what Barbara just described. We just call it something very different. But you definitely need to understand, how you are going to make decisions and how decisions are going to get communicated and how they're going to get documented, because those are going to be your saving grace when the point in time comes where you're in testing and you're trying to figure out if something's a defect or you already made an agreement that that's the way the system is designed. So governance is one of the most important things besides sponsorship in my book, right? Having that strong sponsor, having the governance structure that goes up and down the chain, and again, I'll reiterate what Barbara said, making sure that decisions are being made at the lowest level and not everything is having to escalate up through your senior management is so important for many reasons, right? One, your senior management doesn't have the bandwidth to do that, but two, you're empowering your staff, right? It goes back to sustaining that long-term commitment for these long projects. Your staff want to feel like they're contributing and that they're making a difference as well. And this is one of the ways that you can do that.
Yeah, and I'll just add a couple of things to that. First of all, on the CalHEERS project, I think we might be the first and hopefully the only project that actually had legislation establish part of our governance process. So when the CalHEERS project was started, there was legislation, AB 1296, I think it was in the 2012 legislative session, that formed a group of stakeholders that would be allowed to formally provide feedback on the development and implementation of the CalHEERS system as it related to the ability to have people enroll in healthcare. So that was a bit of a challenge. One thing that was quite different on our project, and this just kind of shows how you need to modify, how you need to adjust to the situation that you're in, because I completely and wholeheartedly support what Barbara and Vicky have said about the sphere of authority and the OD framework. I mean, those are really important to have on large projects. However, our project was a little bit unique because it was developed in such a short time frame that we actually had an abbreviated governance structure that had fewer levels in it. But that was primarily to adjust to very, very tight, non-movable implementation timeframes. So we had a steering committee, we had a board of directors at Covered California, we had the Health and Human Services Agency, but we didn't have some of the traditional levels within the decision-making framework that one would have on a project of this side. For instance, a business owners committee that, and that's what we called it on the CalPERS project, was a business owners committee that would look at some of the decisions, make a lot of decisions at that level before escalating to an executive steering committee. We are actually, because we are in the process of transitioning fully from design and implementation or development of the system to more of a maintenance and operations mode, we're adding back in some of those levels that Barbara and Vicky are talking about. So, and in addition to adding in those levels, we're also expanding the breadth of the group that participates in our version of ODMF. So I think ultimately, what Vicky and Barbara have described is really the right way to go for a project. But I just wanted to add a little bit that sometimes you will need to look at the situation that you're in and make some adjustments. But I would heartily support their method first. So,
Do you guys, how have you implemented Go ahead.
I have a question, actually. I love the concept of pushing decision-making down to the lowest appropriate level and having that very clearly defined and having people empowered to make decisions. But I found that that's hard to bring into a culture. Sometimes the staff level haven't been empowered to make decisions. They aren't used to it. Sometimes the mid-level managers are reluctant to cede that authority to lower levels, and so you find, the staff level people being second-guessed or overruled or things like that. So how did you help bring that into the culture and make sure that that did go all the way down? And sometimes, decisions may not have been what the next level up would have done. Do you second guess the lower level, or do you support them because you gave them authority, and if they followed the process and their reasoning was sound, do you move ahead? So any thoughts about that?
yeah, no, thank you for asking that question, because I think that's a great question, because what I find in most organizations, whether it's a project or not, is that that the lower level staff will make those decisions if you empower them to do that. And typically when you get into an organization or a project where they're not making those decisions, it's because they've been burned one or more times. So I think part of our role as leaders is to make sure that we are not, that we are not penalizing people if down the path it turns out that maybe that wasn't the best path to go down. As long as you have the data or the reasoning and your decision is sound, you can't penalize people for making decisions. In fact, make them, because that's the only way we move forward. Not making decisions, we don't move forward. But you've got to be very thoughtful as a project manager, as a project executive, and really check yourself when you get to those points where it turns out that maybe was, the other way was a better way, or maybe it wasn't the way you would have done it. You've got to really make sure that you stop and think, was this a, was this a sound decision? Because if it was, I am not going to penalize that the person for having made that decision and moving us forward. And we will recover. I have yet to see a decision that's made that cannot be recovered from. But I have seen decisions not made that have caused projects to fail.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I think within our organization, we merged two organizations together to become the CA-MMIS division. And so what we recognized early on is we brought in organizational change leaders to help us with that culture and the change in that culture. So our focus was the people first, and the business and the system secondary. So we had to get the people to where we needed them to be able to continue to move down the path of having a successful project. So we recognized, and our sponsors supported bringing in an organizational change organization that helped us merge these individuals together, or these two teams together, to become one and start working as a team and taking on that empowerment, because we were exactly what you just described, right? People were very leery about making the decisions that needed to be made, and we were going nowhere fast.
So we had some definite challenges with that, especially when we first started. And some of the hurdles we ran into were not wanting the very lowest level, the level 1, but wanting the level 2 to make the decisions. And so, then you're looking at it and you're going, we're burning our level 2. We can't keep making them do all of the work. It's too much. And having to remind kind of our executive team and we have to push down. We can't, it's too much work. And so having that kind of constant reminder, we have that lower level, we've hired them for their expertise, we have to trust them. And just sort of that constant reminder, we have to trust them. The other thing I think that helped ease fears sometimes is by having the documentation on SharePoint. If you're worried, go look at the decisions. They're out there. They're available to you. Go read the decisions that are being made. And I think that helped too. Nothing's being made in the dark. There's no, it's not in a vacuum. The decisions are available for everybody to see. And so I think that helped alleviate some of the fears as well. And then when people started really looking at the decisions that were being made at the various levels, they felt confident that what needed to be escalated was being escalated, and what didn't was being made appropriately at the right levels. And so, but it took time. It took a while.
Yeah, and I think I would just add to that, right, is Barbara's absolutely right? There's that trust building that has to take place, especially when you're dealing with these very, very large projects that we do. So ensuring, just doing a spot check just to make sure that, the people who that are struggling, that you're taking a look at that so that you can help mentor and guide, because that's what we're there for, right? We're mentors to these individuals. We want them to grow up to be us, right? Because we're not going to be around forever. So it's part of our responsibility to ensure they understand how decisions are made, and that they understand at what level a decision and when they need to escalate it, right? That not all decisions can be made at that level. And so you want them to understand and it become intuitive that that's not a decision I can make. That's a decision that needs to go to the next level. So, kind of teaching them and mentoring them is a big part of the process.
Yeah, another thing that's critical is making sure they know when to ask the next level up when they're not sure about their ability to make that decision, instead of making it. So sometimes you want to encourage them and empower them, but you also want them to understand that different decisions have different impacts on your project, right? So sometimes they need to escalate that, and you need to we're going to move into organizational culture next, but you need to have an environment where that's it's conducive to people asking questions, because they will make that decision for you, and you'll find out about it tomorrow, maybe a week later, or maybe 2 weeks later. So, yes?
Well, what you guys talked about has two things pop up in my head. I mean, first we're talking about the point you're making. So the staff are learning that they can make these decisions, or maybe that they need to escalate it because they're uncomfortable with making that decision. But yet, every time they offer up what their decision would be is not the one that is accepted. So they start getting the mentality of, so any idea I have is a no.
Defeatism.
Yeah, kind of a defeatist attitude. And also, the second point is I think they're in conjunction with each other, that as you lower the decision-making process down the ladder, I'll call it, you get more of a technological decision made rather than a business-driven need. Because you can come up with a very elegant technical solution to a situation or to an issue, but that's not tied back to the business need that's driving the project. And so therefore it feeds that defeatist attitude to this very talented technical individual that is trying to be, a contributing part of the project, but yet they don't see that their efforts really are being valuable nor being trusted. So how do you wind up, I mean, I think it's great that the fact that you have some central communication point that allows for folks to kind of get a background or to review things, or, just to refresh their memory about stuff. And so getting 100% participation in that, I could see that being real strong. But what happens when you get into an environment where all of a sudden the participation drops down because of those two issues essentially that I bring up? How do you address that?
I'll speak for the CA-MMIS, right? So what we do is we educate and mentor at our management levels and our supervisor levels, right? We don't just arbitrarily just push the decision-making down. We make sure everybody within the organization understands what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. And what we try to use words like solution providers, right? So having people to come in and provide us their solution and have a discussion around the solution instead of, where you're saying no to what it is. It's more of a dialogue than a yes or no. I agree with you or I don't agree with you. It's more, for us, it's talking about solutions. And we always try to keep that business focus and not the IT focus. And so we try to constantly remind everyone that we're business driven, not IT driven. Obviously you always get into those situations, but that's what we do, is we try to keep that as our major focus at CA-MMIS.
So for Fiscal, I think that there's a couple things. I think Karen hit on it really well, which is sometimes as managers, you have to fight that urge to change a decision just because it wouldn't have been yours. I think you have to look at whether the analysis was sound, and if the analysis was sound and the decision isn't detrimental to your project, you have to accept the fact that your team made the right decision and you have to move on. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes it's much easier to say, well, I would have done this, and so this is what we're going to do. And so I think you have to fight that urge sometimes so that you don't make people feel defeated. But I think the other thing that is really important is to make sure that people know who to work with. So the tech team, people on your technical team aren't working in isolation. They know they need to reach out to their business team, and vice versa. Your business team people are reaching out to your technical team. And then what we do a lot of is the decisions that come to our executive team, our business and technical people will bring those to us as presentation items first. So they'll bring them to us and say, here's the issue, here's the beginning of our analysis and some of the things we're finding. Give us some direction of where you executives, if you have input, if you have knowledge that maybe we don't have, or you have some thought about where you want us to go, so that we have some feedback up front, so that we don't come to you later and have you say, thanks a lot, but no, we're going this other way instead. And we have found that to actually be really helpful for those things that are coming to us. So we're not defeating them. So we're not having them put a lot of work into into a decision that then they're bringing back to us and we're saying thanks but no thanks. We can give them some input because in theory, the people that are on the executive, at that executive level have years and years and years of experience. So if they bring it to us and they present it to us as a problem and say, here's our problem, here's what we found, we have some ideas of ways we can go. Can you narrow the 3 down to 2 that you would like us to further explore? We have found that a lot of times we can either make a decision right at that point and say, no, we can tell you one. Here's the one we want you to go further explore because we already know that one is not an acceptable alternative. Or, yeah, we can narrow that down for you and, you can take that one off your plate and go back and just look at these 2 and come back and tell us which of those are the better alternative. And that really helps instill that level of, yeah, they can bring it to us and we can help them, guide them, but they're still the ones that are really bringing the options and helping to drive the decision.
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing, again, I'm glad you asked that question because it's a great question. One of the things that it just brings to mind, it's a little bit off topic, but what I find is that we have so many really talented technical folks who could very much benefit from some mentoring on how to take their technical solutions and put them into more business understandable presentations, kind of, along what Barbara said. So, like I said, a little bit off topic, but I would really like people to think about, as they go about their roles as project managers, look at some of those technical folks, and when they come up with some really good ideas, and I know for a fact that probably a lot of times these ideas are not getting accepted because they're not being presented in a way that's understandable to the business. So, make sure that you do have some room on your team, that your management team looks to help mentor and coach some of those technical staff on how to do that, how to translate that. Because those are some of the folks that I think ultimately will be the ones, sitting in our chairs in the future. So, like I said, a little off topic, but it brought up a great point.